Dr. Adam Weiss, and today we're going to continue with our ESL methods videos. So this will provide ESL teachers and prospective teachers with techniques on how to teach English language learners who are learning English as a second language. Moreover, we're going to continue in our discussion of the SIOP model. And so now we're going to discuss in specifically chapters 3 and 4. So if you would like to see earlier information about the SIOP model for chapters 1 and 2, please see some of my other videos I have posted on my channel. So now we're going to get into chapter 3, building background. So building background is basically what the teacher will do once they've decided on the content objectives or lesson objectives and language objectives for the lesson. And so after that, the teacher's going to try to find ways to build up students' background knowledge so that the new information that you teach will be much more recognizable and comprehensible for students. So let's begin by talking about how do we build up students' background knowledge. So first of all, we want to develop students' schemata or schema. That's the formal term for background knowledge. Basically, any new information that students learn will be a combination of students negotiating their background knowledge, what they've already understand about the world and what they've seen before, and relating that to what they're currently learning, the new content information. So there's different ways to build up background knowledge, and we're going to talk about them throughout the chapter today. So some nice ways to do it are first to provide chapter previews or anticipation guides. These are nice ways to build up students' background knowledge of the new text they're about to read, because it gives them an idea of what information, what details they should be looking out for when they're reading. Also providing visuals before you introduce a new topic, or providing a model or demonstration can also build students' background knowledge and also get them excited about what they're about to learn. And then, of course, you also want to make sure that you connect your lessons to students' background cultural knowledge. So you should never assume that students already have a cultural understanding of what you're about to explain. Students come from a variety of different cultures and language backgrounds. And so if you're, for example, teaching a social studies lesson on Thanksgiving, well, many students might not have that exact same tradition in their home culture. So you might need to build up students' background knowledge on that tradition in the United States, while also connecting any content based on, let's say, Thanksgiving or maybe even winter celebrations. You can connect to students' home cultures, what the different harvest festivals and celebrations that students do in their home cultures. So one way you can do this is by learning more about your students' culture. You can ask them questions. You can research on your own. You can try to reference famous cultural role models or people from their home culture. And then if you are having trouble finding role models in history or in modern day society, then you, of course, can invite their parents or other cultural members from their community to come and present about their culture to the class. So the next feature of the SIOP model is to make sure that you explicitly link students' knowledge of past concepts or what they've learned previously to what they're about to learn in the current lesson, so the new content information. So whenever you're about to introduce a new topic, you want to make sure you directly reference to where students have seen parts of this or elements of this topic before in their previous lessons, in previous grades, or maybe even previous experiences at home or in their daily lives. So you want to make sure you directly relate the new information to topics students have seen before. You want to refer back to foundational knowledge. So a great example of this might be, let's say you're teaching third grade and you're introducing the topic of multiplication. Well, you can connect that to students' previous knowledge on addition, since multiplication is repeated addition. You can explain that link and that connection, or you could even connect back to some second grade math principles where students learned how to write basic multiplication sentences using pictures. So using equal groups or using an array where there were rows and columns. All of that, second grade students learned how to do using real objects. And so you can connect that to how you're going to bring what students have learned with using real objects to pencil and paper calculations. Later, eventually introducing things like 2-digit by 1-digit multiplication. So now, let's also talk about another key SIOP feature to build background knowledge, and this is making sure that students have a strong foundation of the vocabulary you're going to teach during your lesson. So it's important that you provide strong vocabulary instruction to your students because they may be unfamiliar with some of the words that you're going to use throughout your lesson. So if you do not expose students to that vocabulary and pre-teach it before you teach the lesson, students might be confused during your lesson just because they don't know the vocabulary. So now we're going to talk about some best practices for teaching vocabulary. So research shows that when your goal is to have effective vocabulary instruction, you need to provide various forms of vocabulary teaching. That includes teaching individual words that students might not have seen before, also teaching word learning strategies, like, for example, using prefixes like re or un to understand what the word is meaning, or to break down a word into syllables or parts, or also to understand a word in context, so learning the vocabulary and context based on clues in the story, based on words that students already know in the sentence that can give them an idea of what this unknown word means. A third thing you need to do in your vocabulary instruction is also just build overall word consciousness. So develop in students an interest in learning new words, in recognizing and paying attention to when they're learning new words, and to noting it and having a routine where they document the new words they've learned. And as we mentioned before, academic vocabulary is a second language for most students. They're primarily not hearing those kinds of words at home. So even if you have students who are native English speakers, they're going to benefit from explicit vocabulary instruction. And it's part of both the Texas TEKS or the Texas standards, and it's also an essential part of national standards as well. So you want to make sure that you're developing students' academic vocabulary so that they're ready and capable of comprehending academic texts and engaging in academic literacy activities like reading and writing on grade level. So let's talk about the 3 different types of academic vocabulary, because you're going to want to develop all 3 types for your students. And these are things that you're going to probably need to explicitly teach to students because they might not have seen this once again at home in their casual language they use with their friends and family. So first of all, you need to teach students content vocabulary. These are basically essential terms that you would need that are unique to specific content areas. So these are the kind of terms that you would see highlighted often in textbooks. And for example, in science, a term that would be unique to science that students would have to understand and remember is photosynthesis. While another content-specific vocabulary term in math might be product, like the answer to a multiplication problem. Or an array is another type of academic vocabulary term. So an array would be a picture of items arranged in equal rows and columns to represent a multiplication problem. In reading, a content-specific vocabulary term would be setting. Students need to understand what that term means in a story, a fiction story. Or even another one might be conflict in terms of a fiction story again. Students have to understand the different forms of conflict, for example, human versus human, human versus nature, different forms of conflict. There's other types of content-specific vocabulary terms that I'm sure you're well aware of, but you want to make sure you teach those to students and also specific to the unique context. So the word population has a meaning across several different content areas. So if you talk about population in science, that means the number of people in an experiment. But if you talk about population in social studies, you're talking about the number of people in a given area. So you want to make sure you teach the words in a specific situation or context, so they understand when they would use that words and in what specific meaning they would use for each subject area. Another thing you want to learn and you want to teach students is to teach them general academic vocabulary terms that are cross-curricular and that students will use throughout their academics. They'll use them in all different academic subjects. And so normally these academic vocabulary terms represent a process or a function. So this could be like thinking actions or academic actions that you would use, including like directions that you would give to students. So this could be words like apply, discuss, measure. Students will have to know about that in a variety of different grades and subject areas. You also want to make sure that students know transitional words, because those are a great way to understand text, because they're essential to reading comprehension. So transition words would be like in addition, therefore, next, moreover. And then you also want to teach students specific words for tools that they might use or see in different content areas. So the students are going to see charts in various subject areas like science, social studies, math. Students are going to see different symbols or diagrams in different content areas. And they're also going to need to know the word like images or summary, because those terms will be used in several different content areas. A third type of academic vocabulary that you can teach students is word parts. And so word parts would include prefixes, which are parts that come at the beginning of a sentence, like un stands for not, or re stands for again. And then we also have root words. So root words are the core word. They often come from Latin or Greek. And so an example of a root word might be aqua for water, or scribe for write. And then you also should teach students suffixes. So suffixes are the endings of words that affected their meaning. And so we have suffixes like full to say many, or less to say without. So the key thing is when you teach students these different word parts, you don't want to have them just memorize a list. That can be overwhelming for students and also boring. So instead, you want to have students make repeated connections and to practice with these different word parts given by providing them given words that maybe they might have seen before, but they didn't really think about it in terms of word parts. So like maybe unhappy. Right? Students probably know what that means, but they might not have realized, hey, the un changes the meaning to say not in front of the word happy. Or thankful. Well, that can show you that students can say, oh, okay, well, I knew what that word meant, but now I recognize that that suffix full helps us explain that it's plenty of or many thanks. Some other things you can do is also just develop students' word consciousness. So make word learning fun. Have different vocabulary games. Have students keep track of the words they've learned. Make it a friendly, not necessarily competition, but a friendly game that everyone's trying to keep track of how many words the class has learned. And also, if you are setting that positive tone to learning vocabulary and and trying to use context clues like you're a detective to find out the word of unknown words and making it a fun activity, students are going to think it's also fun and engaging. So when you teach academic vocabulary, apart from making it a fun and interactive activity, you also want to make sure you incorporate children or your students in the process. So you shouldn't just tell students the meaning of a word or have them memorize a list, kind of like we mentioned before. You want students to work with you to use things like context clues or use pictures or their background knowledge to help them understand and come up with their own student-friendly definition for words. Then you also want to show students how they can use words in different contexts. So maybe you might have students do word sorts based on these vocabulary words, or draw a picture of the word, or think of their own sentences using the word. Or maybe make a graphic organizer like a Frere model of the word, where they include the picture, the word, a student-friendly definition, and maybe some examples and non-examples of the word. Also, make sure that students personalize their word learning. So have them create their own personal dictionaries where they keep track of the new words they've learned. Also have them create their own mnemonic strategies to remember certain words. So maybe give them some clues, or have them come up with their own learning strategies or memory tools to help remember new words. Also create a rich language environment for students. So have word walls. Have students regularly compare and contrast words. Have students emphasize different. You can maybe have word walls or word sorts or word organizational charts based on morphemic elements, like the root word, like scribe. Another thing is you want to provide several different opportunities and exposures to words. So you want to provide students with several different texts that use that same vocabulary word. That way students see the word used in different ways. Maybe you will use the word in your own explanation that you present orally to students. Or maybe you might show how the word can have different meanings in different situations. You can also provide several exposures to the word, so students are practicing with the word, let's say every day for a week. Maybe on the first day they're thinking of a student-friendly definition. On the second day they're drawing a picture of the word and explaining their picture. On the third day they're writing 3 sentences with the word. On the fourth day they're finding a book that has the word in it and context, and using and identifying the context clues that help students understand the meaning of that word. And maybe on the 5th day, students do a quiz or do a multiple choice or a word sort activity where they're arranging several words together or classifying several different words. So we've talked about this already, but make sure students are incorporating their own examples and their own student-friendly definitions to help them remember the word. Also, make sure that the words that you select for students are appropriate for students' language ability. If you have many beginning and intermediate English language learners, then you might need to go back to earlier grade levels and select some fundamental academic words from those grade levels, and make sure that students know those so that they are able to engage in reading grade level texts. Another thing is you want to make sure you prioritize the words you pick. So the words you want to pick should be words that are essential for understanding. So without knowing that word in the story or in that passage, then students would be confused. So you want to definitely teach those essential words that are incredibly important for comprehension. Next, you also want to think about which words are the most common or the high utility words students will see over and over throughout their career as students, and they'll see in different context areas and grade levels. So when you're teaching academic vocabulary, make sure you teach words in a specific context, so how they appear in a text, how they appear in a sentence or in a situation. You can help develop students' academic vocabulary by introducing picture dictionaries. You can have students build personal connections to the word, how they've seen that word before, or maybe think of a way to use that word that relates to their daily lives. And then just have regular, extensive practice, multiple opportunities to practice with that word in a way that students find meaningful. So now we're going to kind of shift a little bit away from just vocabulary instruction that builds background, but now we're going to talk about how do we build students' background knowledge before we introduce either a new content subject, a new piece of content information, or a new text. So one way to do this is through read-alouds. Read-alouds are a great way for teachers to introduce new themes or new topics that are going to be discussed in the class. It also is a great way to introduce new vocabulary terms or different genres, different types of writing. And also, you can, once again, develop students' comprehension skills, because what you'll do is during these read-alouds, as a teacher, you're going to prep certain stopping points where you're going to ask students questions, where they'll probably turn and talk to a partner, share their answer to a partner, and then share out to the class, and then the teacher will give the students feedback. So as a teacher, you need to prepare which read-alouds you think would be the most relevant to what you're about to teach in your topics. Also, you have to prepare what could be some stopping points where you can check for understanding from students. And then you also want to think about what specific new vocabulary words you can teach to students while you're reading the book. You could also develop students' background knowledge by doing a pair-share activity and then having students write what they discussed in a pair-share chart. So basically, you could ask students to think about what they've previously heard or know about this topic that you're about to teach. So maybe you're about to teach the different types of communities, like urban, suburban, and rural. Well, you might ask students, where have you seen the word rural before? Or what do you know about rural communities? And then you'll have students first think to themselves, then they'll pair up with a partner and discuss their thoughts, and then they'll share out to the class. And then the teacher can have students write down what they discuss and also maybe write it down on a large chart in front of the class. And that can be a reference tool for students to connect what they previously understood about a topic to what they're about to learn. Another way to build students' background knowledge is to do a digital jump start, which would be like watching a brief video clip online, or maybe the teacher showing it, playing it in front of the class. And this kind of helps give students some background knowledge and can help pre-teach vocabulary and provide that visual scaffold for students. Another way that you could build students' background knowledge is to have them go through the insert method when they're reading. So the insert method is kind of like a pre-reading activity. It's especially used for nonfiction texts. And what will involve is that students will kind of skim or read quickly the text before reading it closely. And they're going to just kind of skim the text and mark it up based on different characteristics. So they'll put a check on things that they've seen before or they already knew. So it kind of confirms what they've already understood. They'll put a minus sign for areas that kind of contradicted or changed their point of view. They'll put question marks for parts of the text they find difficult. And then they'll put plus signs for new parts of the text, like new information they learn. Then after students kind of do that pre-reading, they're going to slowly reread the text and pay attention to their markings, and especially when they're marking things like a question mark or even a minus sign to show a contradiction, students will slow down and read that part of the text very slowly to make sure they comprehend what's going on. So it's a nice way for students to recognize key parts of the text, to reflect on how their background knowledge relates to what they're reading, and then to monitor and modify their reading so that they slow down and comprehend difficult parts of the passage. Another way you can build up students' background knowledge is to have them, to teach them the different elements of fiction stories, which you can show through a plot chart. You could also provide a plot chart that's blank for students, kind of almost in the form of a graphic organizer, and students could then fill it in based on key elements of that fiction story. So a plot chart, there's different ones. You probably used one in junior high that was kind of like, it was almost like a mountain where you have the rising actions, and then eventually it hits the climax, and then it goes down, and you have kind of the resolution, the ending. But also you could have, there's kind of a more simple one that many elementary students use, or many elementary classrooms use. It's called the somebody wanted but so then plot chart. So basically the somebody are the characters, the wanted is kind of like the problem, or the wanted is like, what was the main goal of that character. Then the but is like the problem, their difficulty. The so is how the character overcame that. And then finally the then is the solution, the resolution. So there's different types of plot charts, and you could give them to students to help them organize the fiction based on the common elements of fiction. You could also do a pre-test with a partner activity. And this could be where you give students kind of like a practice pre-test, and then students take turns answering the questions on the test with their partner, and they work together to find the correct answer using maybe their textbook, or using an article, or using resources, or looking it up online. And then this way the teacher can kind of check students to see what they know, like their background knowledge, but it also makes it more manageable and less intimidating because students are working with partners. So even if the teacher chooses to give them a pretest and the teacher just wants to find out their background knowledge without having students look up the answers on their own, so maybe the teacher might first give it to students and students don't use other resources, they'll just use their partner, but they'll discuss it out loud with their partner and then later share their answers to the class. And once they share their answers, and once the teacher has noted where are the misconceptions and gaps, the teacher can then reteach those concepts or clarify misconceptions from previous grade levels, or have students find out their own misconceptions and clarify their own misconceptions on their own by marking the answer as wrong and then having students research on their own the correct answer. So this is a great way to fill in gaps from previous years. Another way to build background knowledge are word clouds. Word clouds basically use technology tools to highlight key words in a text, and they basically, the words that are most common or most used are the largest in a word cloud, the ones that are most frequent. And so I did a word cloud here for Beauty and the Beast. And the nice thing about the word clouds is that it shows students what are the essential words and what words they really need to understand the story. And so if they don't know one of those words, like let's say, for example, a student didn't know what a castle was or a prince. Well, they could ask the teacher, they could ask a peer, they could look it up in their bilingual dictionary, they could research it. So this makes sure that to show students that, hey, these are some important elements of the story or of the text that you need to know. Make sure that you understand these words. Word sorts are a great way to build students' background knowledge. You could arrange it with similar endings, like in the picture to the right. They have similar phonetic endings to help, like with spelling patterns. If you look on the picture to the left, they sorted words based on parts of speech. You could also do word sorts based on synonyms and antonyms. So word sorts are a great way for students to connect their knowledge, their background knowledge of different words, and connect it to maybe new words they're learning in the lesson. So we've already talked about this already, but another way to build students' background knowledge is to pre-teach vocabulary terms before you start teaching the lesson. So teaching at the beginning to students what those key words are and what do they mean, so that when you're doing the lesson, they understand what you're saying. And one way you can do this is you can make it interactive for students, because you might have students help you search for key words they have not seen before. Then you might have students, then you might explain to students what that word means and have students come up with a student-friendly definition and use that word in a sentence that students create. And then you can also have students try to find that word in other texts, or be cognizant of if they see that word again in other texts that you read. And the key thing about it is when you're pre-teaching vocabulary terms, you don't want to teach too many at once. Too many would be overwhelming. Students normally can only retain about 5 to 7 pieces of new information at a time. So you definitely don't want to teach them more than 5 or 7 new words per day. Also, you want to make sure you develop strong depth in knowledge rather than just breadth, like having tons of different new words you introduce each day. You'd rather have students develop depth of knowledge where they really fully understand that word and know how to use it and can use it themselves to create their own sentences or their own language, or even use it in a conversation. That way you know that students are much more likely to retain that knowledge of that word. Another way to develop students' background knowledge is the vocabulary self-collection strategy. And this is basically where students, after they read a text, they find the words they find are most important. Then they discuss those words with a partner or the class. They decide on with their partners in the class which are the most important words. And then they research those words, their meaning, and they also think about how they could use those words in their own sentences. And this teaches students how to identify important keywords in a text and how to monitor their comprehension of their reading, because if they notice that they don't understand a particular word that's important, then they'll teach them to slow down, maybe reread that sentence and try to understand that word with context clues. Or if they can still not understand that word with context clues and resources are available, like bilingual dictionaries or just regular dictionaries, or even technology like the internet searches, if those things are available, students can use those resources to help them understand that word. This activity would be more appropriate for intermediate, high intermediate to advanced, or advanced high English language learners, because it would require that students be able to understand more or less grade level text and be able to navigate different tools like dictionaries on their own in English. Another way to build students' background knowledge is to develop a word wall for the class. And so normally you list words alphabetically, and many times you'll include sight words or words that students see frequently, or maybe important content words. And a great way to do this is also to include pictures. So that way students can refer to the picture if they don't fully understand what that word means. And the great thing about word walls is that students can always reference them when they're writing, and you can encourage them to reference them when they're writing or reading, because that will help them better understand what they're reading. If they, for example, have that picture of that word and they can connect it back to when they learned that important word and they put it on the word wall with their class. Also, if you have it modeled for students in their writing, they can always just go back and look at it, and then they can correctly spell the word. So it helps with spelling as well. We talked about this already, but personal dictionaries make vocabulary learning very relevant and helps build up students' background knowledge. Another way to build up students' background knowledge is to have like a 4 corners vocabulary chart, and there's some different ones, but I like the one where it has the word. Then students think of their own student-friendly definition. Then they give either characteristics or examples and non-examples. And then I also like to include sentences where students write at least 1 or 2 of their own sentences using the word in the sentence. And then also in some way someplace on the paper drawing a picture of the word. A concept definition map is kind of like another graphic organizer to understand words. Basically, it follows this pattern. So the top part is what is it. So the students have to explain the gist of the meaning of that word. They have to think about what situation what situations they would use it and what examples they would use that word. They have to use it in a sentence, and then they have to think of words that are similar, that maybe exemplify that word, and then several different pictures. Closed sentences are a nice way to review and build background knowledge because basically it teaches students to use context clues to understand the meaning of the blank or the word that's left out. And I like to use closed sentences with pictures because students can then fill in the blank of the sentence, not only with the support of their knowledge of how to use context clues, but also by looking at images. You could have word generation activities where students, where you build words together with students. Like you might put like a root word on the board, like viz for like to see, like vision. So then students can maybe add to that to have different forms of words that have that root word. So invisible or visor or visible or vision. All of those words can stem from that root word viz. You could have word study books, and students could create their own word study books as kind of like a game where they have ways to remember words and to practice words with their partners. You can play vocabulary games like crosswords or board games like Scrabble, and those are nice because they're high engagement strategies that students will like to use. And then also you could have students self-assess their own knowledge on either the topic or individual words. So students would write down or rank their background knowledge on a topic. Like 1 would be they've never seen it before, 2 they've seen it or heard it, but they don't really know what it means. 3rd means they have some idea, but they still would need more information. And the 4th would be they know the word very well or know the concept very well. And this is a nice way, if students do this at the beginning of a lesson and they do it at the end of the lesson, it can show them their growth, their new learning. Another thing you can teach is key signal words for students because this helps them with their reading skills. So some key signal words, for example, could be sequencing words like first, second, third, later, last, in conclusion. All of those things are important ways to understand a text and the way a text is ordered and organized. Some other more challenging sequencing words might be some adverbs like while, after, finally, and then some really advanced signal words might be some transitional words like eventually, subsequently, as a result, prior to. And so if you teach these students these signal words, they'll better understand text and they'll understand how the text is organized. So now we're going to get into Chapter 4, Comprehensible Input. And we've talked about this in other videos. So first of all, comprehensible input just means that you're making your content that you're teaching understandable for students. And it's understandable for various different language abilities. So one way that you can do this is by looking, in Texas at least, we have a TELPAS score, which is the ELL students' English proficiency score. So you could look at their TELPAS score from the year before, and you could look primarily at their listening domain, because when we're listening and reading, I guess, would be the best ones to look at, because this will help you understand how you can make your oral language, your discussion, or your classroom lessons that you say out loud to students, comprehensible for students, listening skills, and also how you can make sure that you're providing texts that are comprehensible for students in terms of reading. So when you are having many students that have beginning or intermediate listening abilities in English or reading abilities in English, you're going to want to really chunk information into manageable, manageable parts. You're going to want to slow down in your oral discussion. You're going to want to read new text in a slow fashion, pausing frequently, either when you're explaining things out loud or when you're reading. You're going to pause frequently to check for understanding. You're going to make sure you're enunciating clearly. Sorry about that. And you're also going to make sure that you are using different contextual support. So that could be like hands-on learning experiences. It could be providing visuals. You could be providing manipulatives, things that students can move around with their hands, providing real objects or realia, connecting the content to students' native language, so like connecting it to cognates, words that sound the same and mean the same, maybe providing translated text in students' native language, or maybe pre-teaching the topic in students' native language through an educational video in students' native language. All of those things help make what you're about to teach in English much more comprehensible for your beginning and intermediate English language learners. Now, if your students are advanced and advanced high with their listening and reading skills, then most likely they're going to understand what you're saying, and they're going to understand, for the most part, the gist or the main idea of what they're reading. So you can still proceed with these students at a normal speed, but you still want to check for understanding regularly. And if needed, you still might want to conclude things like some visuals or some gestures or hands-on learning experiences like demonstrations or using manipulatives. Sorry, my computer keeps on messing up. And using real objects. All of these things are beneficial, so you can use these supports, these contextual supports for students, but still introduce content at a normal speed. And your content can be at grade level. You don't have to modify it. Either the text you're reading to students or you're reading with students, or the language that students are hearing out loud that you say. You don't really have to modify it for those students. You just can provide additional supports if needed. So some other ways that you can make sure you build comprehensible input and you make sure that students are understanding what you're saying and what they're reading is to have students orally explain their understanding of a concept. Have them elaborate, not just with one-word answers, but using complete sentences, practicing explaining how or why they think that's the answer. Make sure you have repeated modeling before you have students start to do activities on their own. You want to avoid things like idioms. So like cat caught your tongue. That's an idiomatic phrase that's unique to English that doesn't make a lot of sense in other languages. And so you want to avoid those kinds of idioms or even slang that students might not have heard before. You want to avoid overly complicated vocabulary that's not really relevant to students, to the topic students are learning, because that can just confuse students and overwhelm them. As much as possible, you want to be very straightforward with your wording. You want to have like a simplified syntax or sentence structure. So normally you might want to speak in short sentences with going straight from subject, verb, object. And then if you are choosing to speak in more complex sentences, making sure you repeat key concepts or paraphrase in different ways just to make sure students are understanding what you're saying. And then, of course, you can make sure you're connecting key words to students' native language, such as illustrating cognates. So a cognate, once again, is words that sound the same and mean the same. So a great one in English would be oxygen, or in Spanish, oxígeno. or thesis in English and thesis in Spanish. So those words sound the same and mean the same in both languages. And so if you make a direct connection to students' native language and to the word in English, students are much more likely to understand that English word. Another thing that you can do is make sure that you present topics in a step-by-step manner, starting from the beginning and the easiest parts or the easiest elements, and then gradually increasing with difficulty. So you can have gradually increasing with difficulty by starting easy and then getting more and more difficult. Another way you could do it is also, once again, introduce things with a step-by-step manner, like in the order in which a process is completed. First this, second that, third this, etc. We've talked about it already, but repeatedly modeling and having students work in small groups to have that support from their peers can help them as well. Make sure you write down directions or instructions, and if possible, provide visuals or a video for each step to help students kind of remember if they forget the instructions or directions. Use gestures as much as possible. Use your body language in a positive way to explain what you're describing. Draw pictures. Use real objects. Do regular demonstrations, and make sure you're modeling the process several times. You can also preview the material that you're about to explain to students. So if you're about to read a new text, you might do a picture walk or even a text feature walk where you look at the different pictures in the text, or you might even look at the different features of the text, such as the title, the bold print, the captions that describe the images, the actual images in the text. All of these things give information about what the text is about and the key areas of that text. So if you have students preview the material, then they are much more purposeful in their reading, and they're paying closer attention to what they're reading. Another thing is you could provide various opportunities for students to use technology and multimedia like videos, digital images, video, sound clips. All of these things incorporating technology and multimedia can help make content more meaningful and understandable for students. Also, making sure that students have various ways to demonstrate what they've learned. So have students maybe write something they've learned. Also draw a picture of what they've learned. Explain what they learned out loud. Maybe even discuss the topic in their native language to a peer that understands their native language. Have students maybe do a project with what they've learned, or create their own process or their own representation, their own poster or their own video or their own play or song that explains what they learned. And you could also use graphic organizers to help make sure that students understand how to organize the thinking process of the topic, or how to organize the key elements of a topic using fewer words and using those visual scaffolds. And then even having sentence strips can help make students organize and understand the order of a sentence, or the order of a sequence of events in a story or an activity. It helps provide that support instead of students having to come up with it all on their own. And then also you want to make sure that when you, the teacher, are presenting information, you want to present information in various ways. You don't want to just say it out loud. You want to write it down. You want to draw a picture. You want to do a model or a demonstration. You want to show a video of it. You want maybe to have a song of it. You want to have an activity that students practice it and act it out. You want to have different types of text that discuss the topic and different types of activities involving the topic. That way students see the topic in various ways, and so it can appeal to different learning styles. So, and then, that's basically all we have for today. Thank you so much. I appreciate your attention, and I hope you'll come for the next videos. Thank you.